Dear chess friends, this is Jirka Dufek on the chess channel, and today I will show you a very interesting idea, a black idea in G3 King's Indian defense, which was played in game Ivanchuk Amin Zagreb 2018. Let's start. D4, knight f6, knight f3, g6, g3, bishop g7, bishop g2, short castle, d6, c4, knight c6, knight c3, which is basic position of knight c6 line, and in this position black has a lot of possibilities. For example, bishop f5, but even if this is played by Elias Mirin very often, I think the very dangerous idea is now bishop e3 with something like queen d2 and maybe bishop h6 later. Another main line, or maybe main line, is of course a6, which ideas like rook b8, b5, and if white play e4, then bishop g4, of course, with pressuring d4 square. But even in this position is very interesting bishop move, bishop f4, with idea d5, and then knight doesn't have very nice square there on e5 because of course white is twice there, and queen d2 is on the list too. Another very interesting line after knight c3 is smart rook b8, which is of course connected with a6 line. But this move rook b8 has a small advantage because if now white plays queen d3, then after e5, de, exchanging queen on d8, bishop g5, bishop e6, we see that pawn is on a7 and not on a6, and this means that queen side is very compact. And I think black is fully okay after knight d2, h6, exchanging on f6, knight d4, bishop e7, knight d5, knight b4. And now even black can think about move knight a6. But of course after rook b8, white can play everything like h3 or e4, bishop f4. And of course, there are plenty of ideas and games. But Amin, which is well known, very strong player, 2700 plus Grandmaster, played e5, which is a very old move. And I think there is a very interesting new idea. Of course, Ivanchuk played d5 because he's very principal player, and maybe you will ask me how to continue after de5. I think that the best way is taking with the knight. And now very old game between Turnir and Fischer from Zurich 1959 continued. Knight takes, de, bishop g5, exchanging queens on d1. And even if this position looks a little bit boring, I think that it's small advantage for black that there are no knights on f3 and c6, because now black can play c6, covering very important square on d5. After a few moves, b3, bishop e6, knight a4, knight d7, covering of course c5 square, rook d6. Looks like white has advantage because he will double on d file. But after h6, bishop e3, rook fd8, with a simple idea, bishop f8, rook c1, bishop f8, rook d1, g5, conquering more squares, bishop d2, bishop a3, rook a1, and f6. And now we see that black has very nice pawn structure on king side. I think he has a very big space advantage because he controls a lot of squares in the center, and he won very quickly from this boring position. But Avruch, in his book, offer very interesting idea b3, and he claims that white has stable advantage because pawn structure with pawns on c4 and d6 is very often giving advantage for white. But I think that after knight takes f3, bishop takes f3, rook e8, now Avruch proposed queen d2 with preparing moves like bishop b2, rook d1, rook c1, and pressing in the center with helping with moves like c5 or knight d5. And we see that e5 is not so important. But now I found a very interesting idea, which is not mentioned by Avruch. I think that black can continue with c6. And after something like bishop a3, attacking this pawn, black can play bishop g4, sacrificing pawn. And after bishop d6, now he can play queen a5 with some unpleasant pin on queen and preparing rook a d8. Probably now is the best way how to continue with white is knight e4. And after exchanging queens, it looks like white is clear pawn up. But if we will continue, rook a d8, very unpleasant pin of this bishop, c5, bishop h3, attacking rook. There is not so much squares for this rook because after something like bishop g2, exchanging, of course, e2 pawn is falling. Then rook f e1 is logical move, but now knight d7, attacking this rook on a1 and preparing something like bishop d4, and of course attacking this pawn on c5, rook a d1, bishop c3, not only pinning this knight on the rook, but to preparing bishop b4 with just attacking this pawn again. And after bishop c7, rook e8, bishop f4, knight takes c5, and I think black is absolutely okay. Of course, this is very long line, but I think that the main idea after b3, taking on f3, playing rook e8, queen d2 and c6, and not worry about the d6 pawn, and just play actively bishop g4 or h3, and I think black is absolutely okay. But Ivanchuk play d5, and this is a very critical position of whole line. For a long time, there was main move knight e7, but after something like e4, knight e8, knight e1, f5, knight d3, knight f6, bishop g5, simply white is stable advantage, because there is a big problem with this knight and with this bishop. This knight on e7 doesn't have a very good perspective in the long run, because there is only one square for this knight, and this is just f5. It means that that black will be forced in the near future taking on e4, allowing to knight on e7 to jump to f5. but it means that after exchanging on e4, there will be something like knight takes e4, and white will have stable positional advantage. Square on e4, very weak squares, so white squares, mainly e6 square, because there will be threat, something like knight g5 and knight e6, and even with the knight on e4, there will be permanent threat with c5, and even after all, there is still way how to improve white position with f4 immediately or after queen d2 and rook a1, and then f4. And for this reason, this line, which started with d5 and knight e7, was evaluated like clearly slightly better for white, because black is more or less without active counterplay. But a few years ago, black started to play surprising move, knight b8, and even it looks like loss of two attempts, because of course knight c6 and then break to knight b8. But in fact, knight on b8 has much better perspective than on e7, because now he can simply transfer after typical moves a5, knight a6, and knight c5 on a very good square on c5. It's typical kingside square for black knight, and on c5 he will pressurize on e4 square, and maybe even some way on the queen side, on b3 for example. And on the c5, this knight will be very stable. There is simply no way how to force to leave this square. And I think this is just new modern idea how to play this variation of King's Indian. Ivanchuk played e4, e5, knight e1, and knight a6, which all moves looks very normal. And now Ivanchuk plays bishop g5, which is, I think, standard idea. Simply, white wants to force h6, and then after bishop will return somewhere, d2 or e3, it depends. Then g6 square will be weak, but this idea has more sense if the knight, this knight on e1, is on f3, because after that he can move to h4 and attack to square on g6 or pawn on g6. In fact, there was some, I think, a blitz game between Medvedev and Shimanov on chess.com in 2017. And when Medvedev played knight d3, Shimanov played knight d7. And now I think Medvedev played seriously f4, which looks logical, but in fact black got a very nice counterplay. He took g takes f4, knight b6. Very strange move, because we don't see knight on b6 very often in King's Indian, even in King's Indian with g3. But on b6, attacking c4 pawn is very unpleasant. Queen b3, probably just the only way how to cover it. Rook e8. And now we see that center is very unstable. There are some threats, like, but in a very close future, bishop takes e3 and attacking this pawn on e4. Bishop e3, a4, knight takes, queen takes. But now Shimanov played very nice and strong move, bishop f5. Attacking this e4 pawn, knight f2, and now knight c5. Just adding more pressure on this pawn. And of course, there are some threats to white queen. Queen c2. But now, simple combination. Knight takes, bishop takes, knight takes, queen e7. And black had a very big advantage because he will get a piece back, and with very nice pawn structure and with better pieces, he's simply much better. Maybe he's even winning in this point, and he won in 32 moves. Then, of course, bishop g5, Ivanchuk moves some sense too. h6, bishop e3. Maybe bishop g2 has more sense, because now after bishop e3, knight g4, of course, this is a very unpleasant threat. After exchanging on e3, of course, black will have a big advantage. Bishop d2 is forced, and now f5. Typical idea and typical move for kings Indian defense. Knight d3, covering f4 square, once more time, and maybe preparing something like f3 and bishop e3 and c5. Of course, knight on d3 is a very important piece. b6, covering this square and preparing jump, knight c5. f3, knight f6, bishop e3, and we can stop for a while and we can evaluate this position. I think that position is probably more or less equal because black achieve, I think, a lot of. He covers very important squares c5 and b4, and I think something like a3 and b4 is very, very long from this point. This is not possible to play this way in very short time. And on the king side, black can probably f4 is impossible because, of course, white covers this square too much times. But g5 and then maybe f4 is very unpleasant. It's very unpleasant threat from black. On the other side, white didn't make some error. He simply develops pieces. He controls everything. And he's prepared for something like queen d2, a1, and probably f4 or f4, or something like taking and f4. That is why now black played knight c5, which is maybe slightly surprising because white is probably forced to take bc. Otherwise, if I think, of course, white could play something like queen e2 or queen d2, but then fe, knight g4 is unpleasant with attacking this bishop. That is why I think Ivanchuk took on c5, bc, queen d2, attacking pawn on h6, winning the tempo, but now g5. And black is getting more space. He stopped all counterplay on a queen side. Simply b4 is covered with c5 and a5 pawn. There is no any counterplay from white. And f4 is now very unpleasant. That is why white is forced to and took, take on f5, take on a5, f5, b3, queen d7, and now Ivanchuk did an error. He should play it rook a to e1, and I think probably this is maybe equal, but I think still very complicated. For example, I think Black can try a4, and after knight takes, he can play e4, knight c3, taking on f3, rook takes, knight g4, and now there is very unpleasant threat, taking on e3 and bishop d4, winning exchange. Knight b5, covering d4 square, knight e5. Of course, attacking not only rook on f3, but threatening with knight d3. Rook f1, and now there is some very crazy line, which but I think I'm forced to show you. Rook f7 with a threat. Oh, with the idea doubling on f5, e4, rook e8, e5, knight d3, attacking rook, and if rook will move somewhere, well, not a1 but b1, then of course then will we start, not immediately, but e3 square is very weak. Rook e2, rook f e7, e6, bishop d4, a7. It looks crazy. Black simply ignored this pawn for 5 moves, and now he will take on e3, take, and white will sacrifice queen. Now queening on a8, rook e8, and queen c6. And in this endgame, probably white can make a draw after something like rook c8, exchanging on d7. But still, these pawns are on white squares, and black is very strong. Bishop on d7, and of course, in any endgame, these pawns will be a very nice target for this bishop. I think in a practical game, white chances are worse. So simply, black is better, even if now computer shows something like 000. But Ivanchuk errs with rook f2. For a while, he lost control on e4 square, and that is why black played e4. And this is very unpleasant because this pawn, at this moment, covered both squares, but now, of course, fe is nearly impossible, because knight e4, for example. That is why white played rook f1. But black took on f3, white took with the bishop. After rook takes f3, there is knight g4, just this knight e3 threat. This is very unpleasant idea, of course, exchanging this bishop. This bishop in a King's Indian is a very important piece because he covers all black squares in a camp. But after exchanging, white will simply remain with this very set bishop. King h1, knight e5, rook f2, bishop d3, rook takes f8, bishop takes, rook e1, bishop g7, and black has very big advantage. Still ideas like rook f8, queen f7, queen h5, knight g4, with a very strong attack. Ivanchuk took bishop takes f3, rook e8, knight d1, and a4. Of course, pawn was attacked, but with a4 we are attacking the near base of the pawn chain. Ivanchuk played queen c1, and probably very interesting question is how should the game continue after b takes a4. And I think that's something like queen e7 with idea knight e4 is now very unpleasant. Queen c1, knight e4, rook e2, bishop h3, attacking this and indirectly this, bishop g2, exchanging everything on f1, check, queen f3, and now we see that king is very weak. All white squares around the king are very weak, and of course rook f8 is coming. Rook e1, rook f8, queen c2, and now probably best and safest way is simply taking this pawn, and after queen g2 exchanging queens and knight f5, and for a while we see that there is matter equality, but these pawns are very, very weak and they will fall in few moves. Black is winning in this position. But after queen c1, Black simply took on b3 and played rook b8. And to surprise for everyone is that in this position Ivanchuk resigned. This has of course some sense, because after rook b8 there is probably no way how to defend this pawn. And after something like bishop d2, taking on b3, in the long run, Black will probably collect this pawn too, and he will win after a lot of moves, which is interesting. That rook b8 was not only move. Maybe even stronger in this position was bishop d3. After bishop e2, exchanging on d2, knight g4, exchanging on f8, knight f2 and knight e5, and knight f3 is coming, and queen is coming to h5 with a very strong, probably decisive attack. But I think that rook b8 is very nice human way how to finish the game. And yes, we miss the final, maybe mating final of this game, but we know that Ivanchuk decisions are time to time a little bit crazy. But I fully understand why he didn't want to defend this position, because the position is absolutely lost. Thank you for watching and see you next time. Bye bye.